So, we come to our study of the Mahabharata. This is really a time of great confusion. It's hard to know what is right, what is wrong. Everybody has different ideas of what the truth is. And really, it's a chaotic time that we are living in. And so, that's what inspired me to do a study of the Mahabharata, because I thought perhaps the Mahabharata will have some answers for us. And just to set the context for when the Mahabharata happened, I've drawn on that whiteboard the Yuga cycle. I'm not going to go into any great detail about the Yuga cycle, but briefly, it's a 24,000 year cycle, and there's 12,000 years where consciousness descends, as in we move from high consciousness to low consciousness, and then another 12,000 years where of ascending consciousness. And the Mahabharata actually took place when Dwapara Yuga was moving into Kali Yuga. So if you look at that diagram on the board there, it's marked with red. Dwapara Yuga is a 2,400 year period, and it was towards the end of that period, moving into Kali Yuga, that the Mahabharata war took place. And Dwapara Yuga ended in 700 BC, so roughly that was 3,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries. And the place where we are at now is across the bridge from there, but on the ascending side. So we are in early Dwapara Yuga, where the Kali Yuga is moving into Dwapara Yuga. The time when the Mahabharata war took place was a time of great chaos. And we are seeing the same in the current time that we are living in. You don't have to look any further than our own country. And the same sort of thing is happening in many, many other countries around the world. So, in the high ages, which are the Satya Yuga, and thank God the Satya Yugas are like the higher ages are longer periods of time, and the lower ages are shorter periods of time. So Satya Yuga, which is the age of purity, the age of righteousness, is 4,800 years long on each side. So that's really 9,600 years of continuous high consciousness. And it is said that in Satya Yuga, Dharma, righteousness, walks on 4 legs. And then we come into the next Yuga, which is the Treta Yuga. And in Treta Yuga, Adharma, meaning evil, starts to creep into society. And Dharma, or righteousness, is said to walk on 3 legs. So we've moved from 4 legs in Satya Yuga, means people live with great integrity. You don't have to lock your doors. Perfect honesty, the yamas and the niyamas are perfectly followed. Not that people are practicing it, but that is their consciousness. And then Treta Yuga, Dharma is now on 3 legs. Evil creeps in. And then we come down into Dwapara Yuga. It is said that Dharma in Dwapara Yuga is walking on two legs. And in Kali Yuga is a very corrupt age, absolutely corrupt, and Dharma or righteousness hobbles, it says, on one foot. And so the age that we are in at the moment, which is very, very early Dwapara Yuga, you see, the change doesn't just happen just because, okay, one age finished and the other one started, that everything just changes. The change is just gradual. And so we are in the very early stages of Dwapara Yuga, which means that we still have all the evil and corruption of the Kali Yuga still with us. The majority consciousness is still very meta-oriented, selfish, arrogant, greedy. Of course, there are always people who live in every age, who live either behind the age that we are living in or much above the age that we are living in. Doesn't mean everybody's consciousness is of the age that we live in. It's like a bell curve. Majority in the middle, and then you've got the two extremes. And so the Mahabharata war was fought at the end of the Dwapara Yuga, and I'll just read this wee sentence from this book, the Mahabharata. It's written by Ramesh Menon. I found this version of the Mahabharata very sweet to read. It's just poetic, it's beautiful, the chapters are short and very easy to understand. His language is just delicious. And he writes, once in time out of mind, God created Kshatriyas to establish dharma, justice, in an anarchic world. So we all know that Kshatriyas are the warrior caste, and God created the warrior caste for the purposes of bringing justice into the world, for the purpose of righteousness in this world. But then, in time, the noble race of the warrior kings grew arrogant and greedy. And by the end of Dwapara Yuga, they became tyrants. And they are still practically invincible, writes this author. Now, does that sound familiar? So, when that happened, Krishna, an avatar, descended on earth, together with his cousins, the Pandavas. And so the Mahabharata war is the war that came about in order to establish Dharma once again. Because by the end of Dwapara Yuga, the world started to be run by people who were evil, people who were tyrants, people who were arrogant and greedy. And so Krishna comes together with his cousins Pandavas to establish Dharma. And that's essentially the main theme of the Mahabharata. It's a battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And there's so much that happens. And by the time it gets to the end, both sides have lost just about everybody. Very, very few people are left. And that's how you know that the war has ended. Most people die. And almost every king in India, it was known as Bharatvarsh at the time, almost every king in India had to take one side or the other. Nobody could just stay in the middle. Now, even that seems very familiar from the polarization that we are seeing in the world at the moment. People are picking sides. And in some ways, we are not choosing our sides. Depending on who we are in our consciousness, the side is chosen for us. It says here that 10 million Kshatriyas were killed in the Mahabharata war. That's a huge number, 10 million. But dharma, righteousness, is established once again. I just want to make the connection between the Mahabharata and the path that we are on. So, Krishna is an avatar. He took manifest form when the age was descending into Kali Yuga. Babaji, in our line of gurus, is a reincarnation of Krishna. And that's why when we do our prayers, we say Babaji Krishna. And Master, our own Guru Paramahansa Yogananda, has said that he was Arjuna. And Arjuna is one of the main characters in the Mahabharata. Arjuna is the third son of the Pandavas, and he's the one who's fighting this, who's one of the 5 brothers who's fighting in this battle. And then when Jesus came in the depths of Kali Yuga, and so Jesus came, as you can see, we've got 500 AD is where the 6 o'clock there on the diagram is. So Jesus came in the very, very depth of Kali Yuga descending. And Paramahansa Yogananda has said that the 3 wise men who came to see Jesus and bless Jesus from the east were Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, and Swami Sri Yukteswar. And then the Dwapara Yuga, which kind of started in 1700, but more properly in the year 1900, because there is a 200-year transition period, comes Paramahansa Yogananda. And Paramahansa Yogananda's mission that was given to him by Babaji was, one of the missions was to show the parallels between the teachings of Gita and the teachings of the Bible, the teachings of Jesus. I mean, who better to interpret the teachings of Gita than somebody who was Arjuna himself, who fought in the Mahabharata war? You all with me so far? And so you can see that the story of the Mahabharata is critical to understanding the teaching in the Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita is really a small piece of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a whole heap of restless action. There's just so much going on. There are heroes, there are villains, there is fighting, there is treachery, there is jealousy, there is romance. Everything required to make a good movie is there. Lots of action. But Bhagavad Gita is the stillness amidst all the action of the Mahabharata. So that's how the Gita fits in to the Mahabharata. In the higher ages, everybody could perceive truth directly. And so there was not a lot of need to write things down. But when the age comes down, the veil of Maya is very, very thick. In order for Dharma to be preserved, writing becomes essential. So, sage Vyasa was given this ginormous task of writing the whole Mahabharata story. Because we were moving into a lower age, Dharma needed preserving. And what better way to preserve it than in the form of elevated stories, which is what the Mahabharata is. And very soon we will get into the story part of it, and we'll just allow the stories to just wash through our consciousness. And so sage Vyasa was given this task of writing the Mahabharata. It was a big task. And the Mahabharata is actually 100,000 couplets. So you know how when you read the Sanskrit in the Bhagavad Gita, like they always like 2 lines? And so the whole of Mahabharata is like that, and it's 100,000 couplets. And so because the task was so big, he thought he better get himself a scribe. And so he asks Lord Ganesha if Lord Ganesha would be his scribe. And Lord Ganesha, you know, the elephant-headed god with that big trunk. And so Ganesha agrees on one condition, that the narration by Vyasa needs to be continuous. He must not stop. And so sage Vyasa agrees, and so he keeps narrating non-stop. And because he's narrating non-stop, there's no time to think. There are lots of digressions in the Mahabharata. Lots and lots of, they are like plots and subplots. And the way Ganesha writes it is he breaks one of his own tusks, and he uses that to write what sage Vyasa is narrating. And Asha has said that the Mahabharata, and these are Asha's words, she says it's a gift from the divine to keep sincere hearts inspired at a time when it's not easy to be inspired. It's beautiful, isn't it? To keep sincere, it's a divine gift to keep sincere hearts inspired at a time when it's not easy to be inspired. It's so easy to get drawn into all the turmoil that's going on at the moment. The turmoil that's affecting each and every one of us. But the Mahabharata, reading the Mahabharata, brings things into perspective. And very, very elevated concepts are told in the form of stories. So that's a little bit background to the Mahabharata and how it has come about. Any questions so far?
Vyas just means writer. I don't think there was ever a particular person called Vyas. Because in many of the books they talk about Vyas as the writer of it. But according to the Bhagavad Gita, this is Yogananda's Bhagavad Gita, he gets into the mind of Arjuna and he's telling the story as if Krishna is telling him the story. As if he's having a dialogue with Krishna.
In fact, men of high consciousness, usually that's how they write. They just download it straight from the ether, just like we download files on our computer. They just download it from the ether.
But the word Mahabharata means, Maha means great. Like Mahatma Gandhi, Mahatma, great soul. Maha and Bharat is just another name for India.
The great India.
Yeah. I think the word India, Hindus, was probably coined by the Mughals, when they took over Indus, or anyone on the other side of the Indus Valley. Indus River was India, Hindus. But Indians themselves call it Bharat.
So, shall we dive into the story? So the story begins with a king by the name of Shantanu. There are lots of characters in this Mahabharata. And they're not always, if you're not familiar with these names, it can be so easy to get all mixed up. I'm going to go slow with the Mahabharata. It's not something that we are going to finish in one session or two sessions or three sessions. It's going to take a while. The Mahabharata, I've read two different versions of the Mahabharata. The first one that I read was like a novel, just one book, and it was a very condensed form. And then after that, I got this one, which is a 2-volume set. This one is volume 1. There's another book exactly like this, which is volume number 2. But having said that, there are others who have written, translated the Mahabharata in English, and some of them are like 12 volumes, maybe more. So it's massive. It's a huge project. But at the same time, it's one amazing story. It's one amazing story. And when you start, this is how there's so much happening in the world at the moment. And it's hard to tell what is true, what is false. What is true information? What is misinformation? What is disinformation?
Malinformation?
It's not very easy to tell. And I'm going to use this analogy. It's not very perfect analogy, but I'm going to use it. Especially at night, I haven't got very good eyesight to be able to read. And so what I have to do is I put on my reading glasses. These are not strong reading glasses. They're just bought from Briscoe's. I should go and actually see Roger for better glasses. But I put on these glasses, and all of a sudden, all the words become very clear. Before that, they look like smudged ink on paper to me. There's no clarity. So, studying the Mahabharata gives us the lenses through which we can view what's going on in the world. It makes things clearer. In fact, that has been my experience. A lot of what is going on in the world and my interpretation of it is based on the Mahabharata. I'm very influenced by all the stories in the Mahabharata. I could be wrong. Time will tell. But there's so much that tells me that the Mahabharata is the book to be consulting at this period that we are living in. We are in that same period right now, but on the ascending side of the Yuga cycle. And it makes sense to pick up the Mahabharata and let our views be formed by what we learn from the Mahabharata. So, once upon a time, there was a king called Shantanu. Shantanu was a keen hunter. And he also lived a very, very solitary life. He loved to live a solitary life to the point where he even liked to hunt alone. This author writes, he did not like to share the passion of careful tracking, the breathless chase, or the humming arrow. He did not care to diffuse the excitement and danger of the hunt by surrounding himself with others. Hunting was rather like worship to him. A thing just between himself and the wilderness. And so Shantanu was a young king. He was not married, but he knew that one day he would marry. To the kings in India at the time, having an heir was very, very important. Who was going to inherit the kingdom after they were gone? And so this whole thing about getting married and having children plays a big part in the Mahabharata. And so, but he knew that he would one day get married. But it seemed like he would never take a wife, for he refused the most beautiful and the most gifted of the princesses that were brought to him. And he knew that only when the woman for whom he was waiting would come, that he would marry. And so one day he was out hunting. He'd been hunting from dawn to dusk, and he had not caught a single beast. He missed the leopard, he missed the stag that he saw. It's like nothing was working for him. And at the very end of the day, he rode his horse to the edge of the Ganga River. And he dismounts from his horse, he kneels down, he makes a cup with his two hands to drink the crystal clear water from this Ganga River. And after he's had some water to drink, he washes his face, he splashes water on his arms, and he feels that there is a presence of somebody close to him. And he turns around. He turns around and he sees a beautiful woman. Her skin like soft gold. His language in this book is so beautiful. So her skin was like soft gold. She appeared perfect of face and body. Her eyes were luminous. Her black hair fell to her waist in a cascade. As she stood staring at him and made his blood quicken as no other woman had. And she was no stranger. She had visited his dreams since he was a boy. So along comes a woman that he had seen often in his dreams ever since he was a little boy. And they stood transfixed for an interminable moment before Shantanu went softly towards her. Words failed him, but he held out his hand, wanting to say everything with that gesture. She just stood there playing nervously with her black hair, and her face mirrored the river. Next moment, he drew her to him, and in the deepening darkness, remember it's the end of the day, it's getting dark, the sun has set, he whispers to her, I am Shantanu, king in Hastinapura. Hastinapura is the kingdom that Shantanu is in charge of. I am the king in Hastinapura. I cannot live without you. I want you to be my queen. Her eyes wild, and she says, Oh, I love you, my lord. But I must bind you with one condition if I am to be your wife. And he says, anything for you. Even my life I will give, so that I can have you. I mean, isn't that what it's like when somebody falls in love? And so this is what she says to him. The condition is, you must never ask me who I am, nor question what I do, however terrible it may seem to you. Don't ever question me. No, what I do, no matter how terrible it seems. And this king is in love. And it says here, his hands parted the flowing garment that she wore, and he knelt before her to quench all the thirst of his young manhood. For the king was still a virgin. She breathed, I will be your wife until you question me. But the day you do, I will leave you forever. Never, I swear, I will never question you, whatever you do, Shantanu says. And now, her hands were peeling off his clothes. And as the river swells around them, envelops them, and it seemed that their bodies had turned to water and fire, and they were lost in an ancient dream of love. Can you see how beautiful this writing is in this book? And so Shantanu then takes this new queen home. And because he found her by the Ganga river, he calls this queen Ganga. He knows nothing else about him, nor can he ask, or nothing else about her, nor can he ask her anything about herself as to where she comes from, who's the father, absolutely nothing. Because if he does, she's gone. So he cannot ask her. It's a mysterious woman. So he brings her home, and she was peerless, a perfect companion who knew his every whim, wise and just, modest and charming, and knowing how to keep her own counsel. Most of all, she was his love. And then a year goes by like this. They are deeply in love, and even in the most intimate moments, Shantanu would not ask anything about her. And so a year passes, and Ganga announces to Shantanu that she is expecting a baby. Shantanu's overjoyed, and there are celebrations that last a whole month, because now they are going to get an heir who's going to take on this kingdom after Shantanu. And during this whole pregnancy, the Ganga, the queen, is rather anxious. She's moody. She would have long periods of silence where she would not talk to anybody for days on end. And Shantanu thought that this is a little bit odd. Why is his queen behaving in this way? But then he put it down to pregnancy. Maybe this is what women become like when they are pregnant. And so one day a messenger comes to King Shantanu and says that, your wife has given birth to a son. I know it sounds odd in this day and age where the father is always at the birth of a child. Doesn't look like that's what happened in the time when this Mahabharata took place. But so a messenger comes and tells Shantanu that a son has been born, and Shantanu is very, very happy, and he runs into the room where the wife has just given birth, only to find that the wife is not there, nor is the newly born baby. And he asks the women who were there, the guards who were there, where is she? Where is Ganga? Where is my son? And they say that, let's see what they say. They say, my lord, the queen had hardly given birth when she snatched up the child in her arms and ran out. She said she was going to the river and forbade any of us to follow her on pain of death. And so then Shantanu orders the swiftest horse that is around. He gets onto his horse, and he knew that the queen had left an hour before him, but she had left in a chariot. And so using his swift horse, he should be able to catch up with his wife. And so he goes on his swift horse. He arrives there at the river where Ganga is, with this baby in her arms. And let's see what it says here. The sun was sinking over the western hills, and in that last light he saw her standing at the incandescent water's edge, her infant in her arms. And she was speaking earnestly to the river in an old and fluid tongue. He couldn't understand a word she said, but suddenly he remembered some other words she had once said to him. You must never question me, whatever I do, or I will leave you forever. So he leaps off his horse. She is chanting some mantras with the baby in her hand. She lifts the baby up high above her head and casts this baby in the swirling river. And before Shantanu could protest at what this woman, what his queen had just done, Ganga runs up to Shantanu. She flings her arms around his neck. Her eyes are raged, and she says, remember your oath. And then she pulls him down and folds him in her currents. She made him forget everything in the velvet tide of her sea. So now we get to chapter 2 of this book. Shantanu was upset, but he thought, oh well, there will be more. Never once did Shantanu ask the queen why she had drowned the child, not even in their most intimate moments together. And in a year she was pregnant again. And once more there was great expectation, there was great rejoicing, and a beautiful child was born, a son. Sons were always more valuable in those days. And once again, she takes this child to the river and throws the child into the foaming current. And again, Shantanu would follow and find out what she had done. But each time she made him dumb with a look, smothering him with her loving, so he dared not ask why she had killed the baby. So now we've got a second child who has been offered into the river. And then a year later, she's pregnant with a third child. The child is born, and once again the same thing happens. She goes up to the river, throws this child in the river. Fourth child, fifth child, sixth child, seventh child. By now, Shantanu cannot handle this anymore. The wife is now pregnant with child number 8. And this time, Shantanu is very vigilant. He keeps an eye on the wife throughout the whole pregnancy. Let me just see. And so the time of delivery draws near with this 8th child. And Shantanu waited night and day outside the wife's apartment. He listened as he could not have done in the past, to the cries of labor as their child pushed his way out of her delicate body. And then that night, Shantanu rides to the river before Queen Ganga would get there. And so he's waiting at the river for a whole hour. And he sees her alight from the chariot with her 8th child in her arms. He stood hidden by a tree, and she did not notice him. In her urgency, she ran straight to the edge of the water, and as she lifted the baby to cast it into the flow, into the lightning flow of the river, all the sorrows of the 7 agonized years burst from him. "Stop!" he howls. "You won't kill my son." And with those words, when she hears these words, Queen Ganga hands this baby to King Shantanu. And he was still raging, and he says, "What is this dreadful thing you do again and again? How can a mother cut off these innocent lives?" She smiled sadly. "You have broken your oath to me. It seems you need this son of yours more than you need me. So be it. The curse has ended." And so he says, "What curse? What are you talking about, you murderess?" And then he sees the hurt flash in her eyes. Then she takes his hand and says, "My lord, hear my story before you judge me." And she's stroking his face tenderly, so tenderly that his heart would break. She whispers, "Look, Shantanu, look at who I really am." And so she stands there, transformed before him. She was ethereal light and crystal waves all at once. She was pure beyond belief, brighter than the rising sun. She was a goddess. He drew back from her in awe. She who had been his wife for 10 years stood now an immortal. And she says, "I am Ganga, the river of heaven and earth. The sins of man are washed in me." Shantanu stands there speechless. He wanted to kneel and worship, but the child was in his arms, and confusion was throughout his whole body. And then she returns to her human form again. "Now you will believe me and my tale of 2 curses." So now she goes on to tell Shantanu about the 2 curses. And so first she tells about the first curse. So the first curse was that in a previous lifetime, Shantanu was a king by the name of Mahabhishek. You don't have to remember this name because this is the only time that name will appear. So he was a king by the name of Mahabhishek, And Ganga, who was immortal, had walked into the room where Mahabhishek was, and Mahabhishek fell in love with Ganga, and Ganga fell in love with Mahabhishek. This is a previous incarnation, and this was not allowed, especially because Ganga was immortal. And so, the gods, the devas who were there, says to Ganga, how could an immortal like her and he, a mortal king, come together? So the devas cursed them that that Mahabhishek and Ganga would be born again in a human form. This is the greatest curse you can give to somebody, that you will be born again. So they cursed them that they will be born again in human life, where there would be, Mahabhishek would be king, and Ganga would be the wife for a time. And then they will satisfy themselves with each other's love. You know, every desire we have must be fulfilled. So the desire that Ganga had for this king and the king had for Ganga had to be fulfilled. And that was the play that was happening in this lifetime, during the time of King Shantanu. So that was curse number 1. And so she says, and because of that curse, I appeared before you at my water's edge one day. So then he asks in a whisper, and the children, what curse was that? So then he goes on to tell the story of sage Vashishta and the 8 Vasus. So Vasus are devas. They are immortal beings, and they travel quite easily between earth and the astral world. And so these 8 Vasus, and each one had a wife, come to earth, and they are picnicking. They are picnicking near the ashram of sage Vashishta. Am I saying that right? Vashishta. Yeah, sage Vashishta. And so Vashishta is a rishi, a man of high consciousness. He has done a lot of tapasya, which means that he has a lot of power. People who do a lot of tapasya means austerities. It gives you a lot of power. And so Sage Vashishta's ashram, and these Vasus were picnicking there. And Sage Vashishta had a divine cow. And there was also a little calf hanging around by this cow. And anybody who would drink the milk of this cow would attain immortality. But the Vasus did not need to drink the milk of this cow because they were already immortal beings. But the wife of one of the Vasus was really taken by this cow, the divine cow, and she had this deep desire to have this cow. So she nags the husband to take this cow for himself. And this Vasu says, oh no, I can't really do that. And the queen, the wife of this Vasu continues to nag. she just wants this divine cow, and she says that it's not for me that I want it. I really want for my companion, my special friend on earth, so that she can, drink the milk of immortality and become immortal too. And so after quite a lot of nagging, the Vasu decides that, okay, they will do what the wives want. And so they go and steal Vashishtha's cow. Now, Vashishtha's consciousness is that of an ocean. He is able to see everything that's going on everywhere in the world, everywhere in this universe. And he sees what the Vasus have done, and he's not happy. His wrath has been aroused. And so he curses the Vasus and tells them that they will have to be born again into this world. It's a great curse to be born again. And so he says you'll be born as mortal man. And when the Vasus realized what that curse meant, they trembled. It was unthinkable for them, who were as free as light, to be bound in flesh. So then they fly to the Rishi's feet with the cow and her calf and cried out, "Please, Muni, please forgive us." But the Rishi's curse was no trifle, and it could not be withdrawn. And moreover, the germ of a deep destiny was hidden in that curse. There were mysterious designs to be accomplished by it on earth. You know, there's a lot that happens on earth that we just cannot fathom why they happen. So Vashishtha had grown calmer now, and he felt pity for the Vasus. And he says, "I cannot withdraw the curse, and you must pay for what you did. But," he gives them a smaller sentence. He says, "But for 7 of you, let the curse be brief. You will spend 9 months in the darkness of a mother's womb, but as soon as you are born, you will meet your death and you will be free again." And to the 8th Vasu, he says, "You were the one who actually seized the cow." You see, the others were accomplices in this crime. But the 8th Vasu is the one who committed the actual crime. So he says to him, "You led the others to sin. You must pay more fully than them. You will live a whole life as a man on earth, and yours shall be a great human life. But now go and find a woman who can be your mother in this world." And so they go, they are near a spring where the Ganga River begins from. And they start praying there for a mother in whose womb they can be born. And Ganga comes manifest as a woman and agrees to be a mother to these 8 Vasus. Let me see where. She agrees. So this is what, hang on. So they tell Ganga their tale, and then they say, "We beg you, O Ganga, take a human woman's form, marry a king of the earth, and become our mother. And as soon as we are born, cast the first 7 of us into the water, but the 8th one must suffer the whole span of mortal life." And so with that, Ganga ends her story to King Shantanu. So she's told them about the 2 curses, what they were. She ends her story. Um, and so now Shantanu realizes that Ganga is pure, that she has done nothing wrong, that she is not a murderess. And he kneels before her, asks her for forgiveness, that he even doubted her. And then without a word, he hands her the shining infant that he held in his arms. And very tenderly she takes this baby and says, "When he is 16, I will return our son to your kingdom of Hastinapura, and one day he will rule the kingdom." And Shantanu realizes the time has come for her to leave, and so he cries out, "Will I never see you again? What if I come to the river? Won't you meet me here?" Because his heart, still longs for this queen. So won't you meet me here in secret, hidden from the eyes of man and gods? Oh, how will I live without you? And briefly she was sad. But then she stroked his face and said, "Nothing is hidden, nor ever shall be. Our time together is past." And with the child in her arms, she vanishes. So, for 16 years, Shantanu lives alone. This is the last chapter we'll do today. So 16 years, Shantanu lives alone like a hermit in his palace, and he has turned all his attention to the affairs of his kingdom. He's a just king, he's a fair king. The people living in his kingdom are prosperous and they are content. There is peace. But more than anything else, he was a sad man. But his very sorrow seemed to give Shantanu his strength and wisdom so that his reign could be finer than the one before. The king had one pleasure that he still indulged in, but now, and that was hunting. But he never killed any creature. He only watched their wild lives like an avid spy. Most of all, his hunting took him back to the place beside the river where to his mind he had found his love and where he had lost everyone that he loved. Whenever he came there, he would become peaceful, strangely peaceful, as if he sensed her presence near him. 16 years passed by. Shantanu one day was by the river and he had just fallen asleep. And he has a dream. he sees her standing in this dream. He sees her standing before him once more, stroking his face with her cool hands, smiling at him, calling him with her eyes and with open arms. It was midday. Shantanu dreamt that the river had stopped flowing. He wakes up and sees that the dream was true. The Ganga in front of him was dry. A short way upstream, all the water had gathered in a huge wave, but powerless to flow. Shantanu sees an exceptional dam across the river. And this dam was made of golden arrows. So all the water was dammed up by this dam made of golden arrows. Not a drop of water could pass. And then he hears a soft laugh at the back. He turns around. There she was, with a smile on her face. Shantanu cries, "So you've decided to take pity on me. Shall we go back to the palace? Shall we tell the people their queen has come home?" What do you think? Do you think she's going to go back with him? But she says, "All that is past. When the sun sets on one day, who can call him back to you? Who can call him back so you can live the same day again? There is no returning. Not a moment may we retrieve. Turn your heart away from what is over." Um, in the autobiography of a yogi, Master says that he had a bittersweet acquaintance with the Mahabharata. Whenever the mother needed to instruct or discipline her children, she would pull out stories from the Mahabharata. And you can see, this little bit here that the Queen says is quite profound. Who can retrieve a single moment of their lives? So, and then he realizes that what she has said is true. So then he asks her, "So, but why have you come back?" And she says to him, "Do you see the river, my lord?" And he says, "Yes." And asks, "Who has done this? As in, why has the river stopped flowing?" And so he smiles. He did not know quite why, except that a great happiness was dawning on him. And wryly he added, "Who holds your tameless flow in check, which all my love could not bind?" And before she could answer, there was a deafening report. The dam of arrows gave way. The river starts flowing again. And on the waves comes riding the 16-year-old boy who's no longer that little baby. And this boy says to the mother, "Mother, did you see? I held the river up again. Imagine how powerful the 16-year-old is. He's telling the mother, did you see? I held up the river to the point where the river could not flow. And then he noticed Shantanu. He looked at the king with his great dark eyes, an uncanny recognition sweeping across his heart. The young face was a picture of confusion as delight and disbelief chased each other across it. Laughing, Ganga said, "My child, this is your father." And to the father, she says, "This is Devavrata." That was the name of the son. And the boy prostrates himself at Shantanu's feet. And then Shantanu raises him up. Ganga says, Devavrata is 16 today. And he knows everything a prince should know. Vashishta taught him the Vedas and the Vedangas. Vashishta is that, sage with that cow. He has taught him the Vedas and the Vedangas. Brihaspati taught him politics. And at my begging him, the bane of the Kshatriyas, Parasurama taught him archery, as in he's a very accomplished man. I do not think the Kurus will find a better heir for their ancient throne than my Devavrata. He is a Kshatriya, my lord. Take him with you to the kingdom of the heroes. And so, arm in arm, father and son go to Hastinapura. And Shantanu is full of joy. So the next time we meet, we'll look at what happens when father and son start living together in the same kingdom. Quite a story, isn't it? And it gives you a sense of a much, much bigger perspective, the longer rhythms in which things happen.
Can you say a little bit about the relevance of it today? Like, not from the first 3 chapters, but just get a feel
For the relevance of the Mahabharata. So basically, the Mahabharata is a story of a kingdom, and this kingdom was being ruled by some people who were unrighteous. Just before we saw that when King Shantanu was ruling the kingdom, and because he was a good king, a fair king, a just king, people in his kingdom were content, people in the kingdom were prosperous, and everybody could live in peace and harmony. So when people ruling a kingdom are good people, righteous people, everybody else prospers. But this kingdom of Hastinapura, at some point in the story, will start getting ruled by evil people, demons. And if we allow unrighteous, adharmic people to be in charge of a kingdom, it's bad news for everybody. And in this story, the good people tried all they could to negotiate with the people in power so that there could be peace in this world. They did everything that they could, But they came to realize that no negotiation with the evil people was possible. Not only were they not willing to negotiate, it was they took the approach of our way or the highway in today's language. In the language that's used in here, it says Duryodhana, who's the one of the key characters and the eldest son of the evil guys, says to the good guys that I am not even giving you that much that would fit on the eye of a needle.
Not negotiable.
Not negotiable. We're not negotiating anything. And these people were willing to accept less and less and less. But to these people, nothing was acceptable. And so Krishna gets involved. Krishna too realizes that no negotiation with these people is possible. And he storms out of those negotiations and says, I declare war. You guys are just going to have to fight it out. And so what is happening in our very own country? You can see that there is one side that is not willing to negotiate.
Move your cars and then we'll negotiate.
Just like righteous beings reincarnate on earth, good people reincarnate on earth, unrighteous, adharmic, evil beings also reincarnate on earth. They don't always come in a form where we will recognize them as evil, because if we would recognize them as evil, we would call them out. So they don't come in that form. They come disguised as good people. And when you really begin to understand the Mahabharata, you begin to, the veil of Maya starts to lift, and you start seeing reality for what it is. I'm going to end there.